The game is almost ready to start, so stand by for...
This is the earliest known footage of a game of football being played in England, an 1898 First Division match-up between Blackburn and West Bromwich Albion, played at Ewood Park in front of 12,000 spectators, recorded by Welsh film pioneer Arthur Cheetham. The faceless players that you can make out through the film grain are the first generation of professional footballers. Players of this time were just as pioneering as Arthur Cheetham, yet unsurprisingly their names and contributions to the game are shrouded in over a century of football history. Yet these players were the bedrock which that history rests upon. This video is about one of those silent superstars, whose revolutionary contribution to modern football is largely forgotten. Looking past Arthur's grainy footage into even murkier depths of football history, we arrive in the football of the 1870s and 80s. At this time there were no professionals. Football was a sporting pursuit of southern country gentlemen and the amateur distraction for northern factory workers and labourers. As the game's popularity spread in the north, players and clubs looked to football as a financial opportunity that could raise them out of poverty. But Article 15 of the FA rules forbid paying players a wage. The jostling between the upper class FA and the working class players was sparked in 1883. The FA Cup was the most prestigious trophy in England at the time, being the oldest organised football tournament in the world. The 1883 finals saw the battle of class played out as the Old Etonians faced the Blackburn Olympic, a team consisting of factory and mill workers who played their home games at the Hole in the Wall ground, named after their local pub. Offsetting goals from Matthews and Goodhart meant the teams needed extra time to decide a champion. 17 minutes into extra time, Blackburn forward James Costley fired in the decisive goal past Etonian keeper John Rawlinson, who would later become an MP for 20 years. Blackburn Olympics victory in 1883 didn't just make them the first working class team to win the FA Cup, but they legitimised the other working class clubs as being on par with the Oxbridge graduates. Preston would be the club to take up the Olympics mantle by defeating the private school linked Upton Park in the 1884 FA Cup third round. Upton Park then lodged a complaint with the FA over suspicions Preston players were collecting a wage, which they absolutely were. In retaliation, Preston and other northern clubs backed out of the competition, issuing an ultimatum to the FA to bring in professionalism or they would set up a rival Northern Football Association and start a professional league. The FA had to confront the issue of professionalism once and for all. Whilst English football was mired in infighting, Scottish football was content in amateurism, although rumblings of secret payments by clubs still circulated. Hibernian, who were one of the most storied clubs at the time, were Scottish Cup hopefuls, having reached the semi-finals. But hopes were dashed as they fell 2-0 to defending champions FC Renton. Dejected fans turned to their reserve team, where they were introduced to the man who would echo in the new age of football. The exciting dynamic winger enamoured himself with the Hibs faithful, garnering the nickname Darling due to his young age. Patrick William Groves was just 16 at the time, but was already an attacking dynamo, graced with pace and dribbling unseen at the time. The reserve team won the second 11 Cup on the back of his performances, which earned him a call up to the senior squad. In his debut against Dumbarton, Groves set up all 3 Hibernian goals, cementing himself as a first team regular. He was an instant fan favourite and was evidently Hibs' best player even at a young age. In his second season as a regular, he dragged Hibs back to the Scottish Cup semi-finals. Semi-final opponents Vale of Leven were overwhelming favourites, having been to the final twice in the last 3 years. It was in this game that Darling Willie Groves had his first brush with controversy, a theme throughout his career. Vale took an early 1-goal lead, but Groves took over the game and scored 2 great solo goals before half-time, assisting the third in the dying minutes to seal the game. Groves was always a big game player, a reputation that would stick to him throughout his career. But Leven complained to the Scottish FA that Willie Groves was taking illegal payments. In all likelihood, he was receiving some kind of compensation for staying at Hibs, but in the late Victorian period, life for the working classes was harsh to say the least, particularly in Scotland, so you can't fault Groves for earning all the extra money he could. However, a spotlight was put on Groves which he never managed to shake. An investigation was pending as Groves and Hibs squared off against Dumbarton in the prestigious Scottish Cup final. Thousands of Hibernian fans crammed into Hampden Park on the 12th of February 1887 to watch their talismanic young winger on Scotland's biggest stage. Dumbarton managed to contain Groves for 60 minutes as they cruised to a 1-0 lead, but reminiscent of his debut, Groves took over the game. A trademark slaloming run around the Dumbarton defence allowed him to set up Montgomery for the equaliser. In the last throws of the game, Groves curled in the match winner from 16 yards out. Off the back of the 18-year-old's emphatic performances, Hibernian lifted Scotland's most prestigious trophy only 12 years into their existence. Groves' career would have further highs and lows. His story is intimately linked with the professional struggle in England. A rival to the FA could have damaged the financial return of FA clubs. Probably thinking about this, the FA Secretary, C.W. Atlock, who first proposed international football as well as created the FA Cup, proposed allowing professionalism. Begrudgingly, the FA accepted, and on the 20th of July 1885, professional football was created. Players at this stage had license to move between clubs as much as they wished, on a season-to-season basis. The working class players seemed to have won the debate with the FA, but as the groundwork for the first professional season was being laid, the FA began to conspire against the players who had rattled its authority. As professional football was underway in England, Willie Groves made his next step up the amateur ladder in Scotland. In 1888, he moved from boyhood club Hibs, where he dominated, to play for Celtic in their first ever season. He was cleared of any suspicion he was taking payment to stay at Hibs by a league tribunal after his Scottish Cup victory, narrowly avoiding suspension. This likely sped up his exit from Hibs, although some reports say he carried on accepting payments and moved to Celtic for financial benefits. Whatever reason he moved clubs, Groves carried on being one of the world's best young forwards. He showed this in a pre-season friendly against old club Hibernian, netting twice in a 3-2 win for the new boy Celtic. Groves cemented himself as one of Celtic's early legends through one of his best performances, against Rangers no less. The old firm wasn't what it is today, but it has always been a special affair for both sides. Groves likely played in the first ever Old Firm derby in 1888, but it was the first ever Scottish Cup meeting between the teams in September 1890, where Groves did his part to fan the flames of the Old Firm. In front of 16,000 fans in Celtic Park, Groves was in inspired form. His playmaking ability was on full display as he assisted Celtic's first 2 goals, which were unfortunately ruled offside. With frustration high, Groves proved once again that he was a man for the big occasions, scoring with a delicate finish in the 43rd minute. Groves' goal was the only goal of the game, and Celtic knocked out Rangers for the first time, less than 3 years into their existence. Groves' impact on Celtic was such that he is immortalised in the poem Bold Bold Celts, the 1890s version of a football chant. There's one that wants a watching, they call him Willie Groves. He's wonderful to look at as round the field he roves. Oh, he beats my comprehension, admiration I have felt. He's a dasher, he's a smasher, he's a bold, bold Celt. Yet not 1 month later, after the Rangers' victory, Groves would finally swap the amateur football of Scotland for the professional football of England, where he would become football's first superstar transfer. After the FA had reluctantly accepted professionalism, the founding of the English Football League took place, playing its inaugural season in 1888, and this allowed Groves to make his switch to English football. Although being Willie Groves, the transition was not without controversy. His first stop in England was with Everton, whom he signed with in 1890. His tenure with Everton lasted a measly 2 days, before the FA discovered faulty paperwork in the transfer and voided Groves' contract with the Toffees. Groves could have simply re-signed with Everton, but apparently the 2 days was long enough to change his mind on joining the Merseyside club. This earned him a scathing write-up in the Liverpool Mercury. It is now the position that Willie Groves will not repeat his contract with Everton, since in the face of his mercenary sins, the prodigal has been welcomed back to amateurism by the Scottish Association, with all the blind faith of a doting mother. He didn't return to Scotland for long, instead joining West Bromwich Albion the same year. His time with the Baggies wasn't as successful as his Scottish years had been. The club was in miserable league form, finishing dead last in Groves' first season, 1991, with just 5 wins and 12 points. Meanwhile, Everton, who Willie Groves had spurned ironically, were champions that year. Bar 2 goals in the FA Cup, Groves hadn't lived up to the hype in his first year, perhaps due to playing in a deeper midfield role or the change from Scottish to English football. The goals dried up for him. His second season at the club was much the same league-wise, with West Brom managing just 18 points and 0 away wins. Yet, as was evident in his Scottish years, where Groves goes, cup success follows. Albion went on an inspired run in 1892, beating defending champions Blackburn Rovers in the second round 3-1, then beating the Football Alliance's Sheffield Wednesday 2-1 at home. West Brom and Groves' Cinderella run continued, beating Nottingham Forest in the semi-final, but they needed 2 replays to do so. The first 2 games ended 1-1 at Molineux, before West Brom finally won 6-2. The Baggies had made an unexpected run to the final and were massive underdogs in the tie against Aston Villa. Groves' performances had improved in his second season in England, but Albion was still deploying him at half-back. Yet he showed another side to his game despite this: his versatility. The final was set for 19th of March 1892 at Kennington Oval. 32,000 spectators packed in to watch the last FA Cup final at the historic cricket ground, also the first final to use goal nets. Groves once again rose to the occasion for underdogs West Brom, however not in the ways he had in Scotland. Groves was absent from the score sheet as West Brom stunned Villa 3-0. However, match reports show he dominated in midfield and neutralised Villa's dangerous forwards, providing the backbone for the unlikely victory. Despite playing on a lacklustre Baggies team, he had caught the eye of bigger clubs in the small league, particularly recently defeated Aston Villa. This is where Groves has his next controversial incident, the one that makes him one of the most important footballers of all time. 7 years after the working class players had fought for a wage and won the right to decide where they play, the FA implemented a rule that will give control back to club owners and away from the players. Up to now, transfers had been non-existent, with players being able to move freely after every season. There was no need to pay a club for a player's rights. But in 1893, the FA decided to put a stop to the club hopping and implement the retain and transfer system. Players were forced to register with one club and one club only. That club would then hold their registration indefinitely until the club decided to sell the player's rights to another club, even after a player's contract expired, effectively holding a player hostage until the wealthy club owners agreed to a transfer. Looking to take advantage of the new system, West Brom wanted to cash in on Groves. Everton once again stepped in to sign Willie after he spurned them 2 seasons before. Meanwhile, Groves was in his own negotiations with Villa. Maybe he was confused over the new transfer system and thought he had agency to sign with Villa as under the old system. When Groves signed a contract with Villa, both Everton and West Brom lodged complaints with the FA. Looking to consolidate their new authority over players, the FA made a martyr of Groves and Villa. Villa were fined £50 for poaching Willie, the equivalent of £6,000 in today's money, and forced to pay West Brom a £100 transfer fee, about £12,000 in today's money. In an era where players' wages were £1 a week, these figures were almost comically inflated. This made Groves the first ever footballer to be transferred for 3 figures, and one of, if not the first ever transfer in football history. This is where Groves becomes a legend, the first ever superstar footballer. The hefty price tag didn't seem to faze Willie Groves, and he fit naturally into the Villa team, playing all 30 games as Villa cruised to a league title, his first taste of league success. He showed he was still a threat in front of goal in what must have been a heated grudge match against West Brom, where he scored a brace to secure a 6-2 win. Groves also scored the decisive goal away at Burnley that wrapped up the league title. The league victory for Villa is the peak of Groves' career, and sadly the fall was a steep one. After the 1893-94 season, Willie contracted TB, a deadly disease at the time. He was just 25. Fortunately, he survived this scare, but the toll on his body left him with a myriad of health problems, particularly with his heart. Villa was concerned about whether he could play football again, so didn't renew his contract, with Groves unable to move to a new club due to the transfer rules, even though his contract had expired. Just a year removed from being the world's first record-breaking signing, Groves' career was in tatters. The rest of his short football career saw him play sparingly for Hibs and Celtic, and in 1896 he was forced to retire from football at 27. He remained ever popular with the Celtic faithful though, shown by a charity effort by the club in 1898. Little is known of what happened to Groves after his footballing career, except he did move to Edinburgh and work as a labourer for the Edinburgh Housing Association. Health concerns continued to plague the one-time superstar, and he eventually died in 1908 at the age of 37. Ironically, the once-styled Darling Groves died the day before Valentine's Day in Edinburgh, penniless. As a footballer, Groves was instrumental in winning silverware for all of his clubs. Unfortunately, a monstrous price tag clouded his achievements. His obituary in the Liverpool Mercury, the paper that once scolded him in 1889, read, "The death is announced at Edinburgh of William Groves, who in the late 80s and early 90s was a well-known association football player." Seems that not long after Groves' playing days, he had been reduced from the most expensive footballer of the era to just was well known. Groves was maybe the first football transfer and also the first cautionary tale, but he was definitely football's first star.